Samuel's axe fell in perfect rhythm against the cedar, each stroke measuring another moment of solitude he'd chosen 5 years ago. The Oregon forest wrapped around his cabin like a sanctuary, miles from the nearest neighbor, exactly as he preferred. The knock came soft, 3 hesitant taps barely audible over the crackling fire. Samuel set down his coffee, frowning. Nobody traveled this far into timber country after dark. She stood in his doorway like a ghost made real, clutching a small child against her mud-stained calico dress. Her hands moved frantically in the lamplight, signing. He realized. Deaf. The child buried her face in her mother's skirts, exhausted beyond fear. The woman pointed desperately toward his barn, then pressed her palms together, pleading. Samuel studied her torn hem, the child's hollow cheeks. Without a word, he stepped aside and gestured them in. Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. The morning revealed what darkness had hidden. Samuel woke before dawn, his back stiff from sleeping on the floor beside the Franklin stove. The woman and child lay huddled together on his rope bed, both still wearing their traveling clothes. The child's boots had left mud on his quilt, but she'd been too exhausted to remove them. Samuel moved quietly, stoking the fire and setting coffee to boil. He mixed batter for flapjacks, opened a jar of preserved peaches from last summer's trade with the Hendersons, and poured fresh buttermilk from yesterday's delivery. The familiar routine felt different with guests present. Each movement seemed louder, more deliberate. The child woke first, brown eyes wide with uncertainty. Samuel offered a small smile and continued cooking, making no sudden movements. The mother stirred at her daughter's touch, immediately alert, protective. Sarah, she'd pointed to herself last night, spelling out the letters, sat up carefully, smoothing her torn dress. Samuel set 3 tin plates on the table, serving generous portions. The child reached eagerly for the warm flapjacks, but Sarah hesitated, her hands signing what he understood as refusal or apology. He shook his head, pointed to the food, then to them. Eat. The child devoured everything, licking peach syrup from her fingers. Sarah ate slowly, mechanically, her eyes never leaving Samuel's face. When breakfast ended, she stood abruptly, signing thank you over and over, that much he could understand. She gathered their meager belongings, a worn carpet bag and small bundle, gesturing toward the door. Samuel walked to the window, pointing at the sky. Storm clouds gathered along the western ridge, dark and promising. He'd lived here long enough to read the signs, rain by afternoon, heavy through the night. He shook his head firmly, pointed to the approaching weather, then to his guests, then to the cabin. Stay. Sarah's shoulders sagged with relief or defeat, he couldn't tell which. The child tugged at her mother's skirts, swaying on her feet, too tired for another mile, let alone the 20 to town. Samuel grabbed his coat and headed for the door, pointing to himself, then to the woodpile outside. Work. He pointed to them, then to the cabin. Rest. Sarah nodded slowly, understanding. As he stepped out into the cool morning air, he wondered what he'd started by opening his door to strangers who couldn't even tell him why they'd come. 3 days passed in careful routine. Sarah helped inside while Samuel worked outside, their paths crossing at meals where hands served better than words. She washed dishes in the basin, mended a tear in his work shirt without being asked, and kept Emma, the child's name, spelled out slowly from disturbing his things. Samuel learned their basic signs: eat, sleep, safe. Sarah's eyes lost some of their wild fear each time he signed safe, though her shoulders remained tense whenever hoofbeats echoed from the trail. The 4th morning brought what she'd feared. Samuel was splitting kindling when a rider approached a man in city clothes astride a rented horse, his bowler hat and pressed wool coat marking him as foreign to timber country as a peacock among crows. The stranger dismounted with practiced authority, eyes scanning the cabin and surroundings. "Morning, friend," the man called out, his smile not reaching his eyes. "I'm looking for my sister-in-law. Poor woman's touched in the head, deaf and dumb, you know. Ran off with my niece during one of her spells. Family's worried sick." Samuel set down his axe slowly, measuring the man, clean fingernails, soft hands, the kind who hired others for honest work. Haven't seen anyone like that. You sure? The stranger stepped closer, pulling out a photograph. Woman about 24, dark hair, small child, maybe 4 years old. They would have come through maybe 3, 4 days back. She's not right in the mind, needs proper care in an institution. The child needs her father. Through the cabin window, Samuel glimpsed Sarah pulling Emma back from view, her face pale with terror. He kept his expression neutral, wiping sweat from his brow with deliberate slowness. Mister, I see maybe 3 people a month out here. If a woman and child had passed through, I'd remember. Samuel picked up his axe again, testing its weight. You might try the railroad towns. Easier traveling for a woman with a child. The stranger studied him for a long moment. There's a reward. $50 for information leading to their return. Don't need money that bad. Samuel resumed splitting wood, each strike deliberate and forceful. Best of luck finding your family. The man lingered another moment, gaze drifting to the cabin where laundry hung on the line, Samuel's shirts and trousers. Nothing more. Sarah had hidden their things that morning, some instinct warning her. If you see them, the stranger said, mounting his horse, send word to Portland. Name's Morrison. They'll know where to find me. Samuel nodded once, continuing his work until hoofbeats faded into forest silence. Only then did he lean the axe against the chopping block and return to the cabin. Sarah stood pressed against the far wall. Emma clutched to her chest, both trembling. He signed slowly, carefully. Safe. Here. Safe. Sarah's eyes filled with tears she wouldn't let fall. Her hands moved in complex patterns he couldn't read, but her meaning was clear in the way she pressed Emma closer, in the grateful bow of her head. Whatever Morrison was to them, Samuel had chosen their side without needing the words to explain why. That evening, Sarah taught him new signs: danger, man, hurt, and thank you, the last repeated until his clumsy fingers could form it properly. Emma watched from her mother's lap, adding her small voice to the lesson, bad man gone. Yes, Samuel said aloud, then signed what Sarah had taught him. Bad man gone. It was the first time Emma smiled since arriving, and Sarah's shoulders finally, truly relaxed. They ate dinner in companionable silence, the storm that had threatened for days finally breaking overhead. Rain drummed on the roof like 1,000 fingers tapping, sealing them inside together, safe from whatever hunted them in the world beyond these walls. Samuel added more wood to the fire and pulled out his seldom-used journal, recording the day's events in careful script. At the bottom of the page, he wrote, "Some choices make themselves. These two stay until they choose to go." Looking up, he found Sarah watching him write, Emma asleep against her shoulder. She signed something he didn't understand, then placed her hand over her heart and pointed to him. The meaning needed no translation. Outside, the storm grew fiercer, but inside the cabin, a different kind of shelter had been built, one made of trust, chosen sides, and the promise that some strangers were worth any risk. Samuel closed his journal and signed the only response that mattered, home, here, home. The word felt different in his hands than it ever had in his mouth, fuller somehow, more true. For the first time in 5 years, the cabin felt less like a hiding place and more like what it was always meant to be. 2 weeks had passed since Morrison's visit, and the cabin had developed new rhythms. Each morning after breakfast, Sarah would sit with Samuel at the rough pine table, teaching him signs with patient repetition. His large, calloused hands struggled with the delicate movements, fingers that could split oak with precise axe strokes fumbled over the subtle differences between please and sorry. Like this, Emma said, her small voice startling in the quiet morning. She demonstrated the sign for bird, her tiny fingers fluttering perfectly. Samuel copied her movement, his thick fingers looking like crow's wings compared to her sparrow gestures. Sarah's eyes crinkled with suppressed laughter, the first genuine mirth he'd seen from her. She corrected his form gently, her touch feather light on his wrists, guiding the proper motion. When he finally signed it correctly, Emma clapped with delight. "Bird," she announced proudly. "Papa Samuel learns good." The title stopped him cold. Papa Samuel. He glanced at Sarah, who flushed and signed rapidly to Emma a correction, perhaps a scold. But the child just smiled and returned to playing with the corn-husk doll he'd made her the previous week. Sarah signed something apologetic, her movements sharp with embarrassment. Samuel shook his head, signed back, "It's fine." Then, after a moment's thought, he added a new sign she'd just taught him, "Happy." The afternoon brought better weather, and Samuel decided to show them his work territory. He'd been cutting timber alone for so long that having company felt strange but not unwelcome. Sarah wrapped Emma in her shawl, though the October sun held surprising warmth, and they followed him into the forest. Samuel moved slowly, pointing out landmarks: the creek that marked his eastern boundary, the lightning-struck pine that served as a marker, the old growth he'd never touched because eagles nested there each spring. Sarah watched everything with intelligent eyes, occasionally signing questions he only partially understood. Emma darted between them like a small rabbit, examining mushrooms and collecting pine cones. At the cutting site, Samuel demonstrated his work, showing them how he selected trees, the proper angle for felling, the way to read wind and lean. Sarah observed intently while Emma built tiny houses from wood chips. When Samuel paused to sharpen his saw, Sarah signed something and pointed to herself. Then to the two-man saw leaning against a stump. "You want to try?" he asked aloud, forgetting she couldn't hear. But she understood his expression and nodded firmly. They positioned themselves at either end of the saw. Samuel showed her the grip, the stance, then began the rhythm. Pull, release, pull, release. Sarah caught on quickly, matching his motion. The saw sang through the wood, and though she lacked his strength, she made up for it with determination. When they finished the cut and the log fell cleanly, she smiled, truly smiled for the first time. Emma ran to her mother, signing excitedly about how strong Mama was. Sarah's chest heaved from exertion, but her eyes shone with pride. She'd contributed something real, something beyond cooking and cleaning. That evening established what would become their pattern. After dinner, Sarah would mend clothes or work on a quilt she'd started from fabric scraps. While Samuel whittled by the fire, he was making a set of animals for Emma: a horse, a deer, a rabbit. Each night, Emma would curl between them, sometimes leaning against Samuel's knee while he carved, sometimes resting her head in her mother's lap. "Story," Emma demanded this night, speaking to Samuel while signing for her mother. Samuel hesitated. He knew no children's stories, hadn't heard one since his own childhood, but looking at their expectant faces, he began, "Once there was a bear who lived all alone in the woods." He spoke aloud for Emma while attempting to sign key words for Sarah. His hands mangled the story as much as they did the signs, but Sarah helped, adding graceful movements that painted the tale in the air. Emma watched both versions, enchanted by the dual telling. When the story ended with the bear finding a family of rabbits to share his den, Emma yawned hugely. Sarah signed something to her, and the child kissed her mother's cheek, then turned and kissed Samuel's rough jaw before he could react. "Night, Papa Samuel. Night, Mama." After Emma was tucked into the small bed Samuel had built for her in the lean-to addition, Sarah returned to the main room. She signed slowly, making sure he understood. "Emma likes you, trusts you, never trusted him." Samuel nodded, understanding the weight of that trust. He signed back, words he'd been practicing. "She's safe. You both safe. Always." Sarah studied his face for a long moment, then signed something complex. Seeing his confusion, she went to his journal and pencil on the shelf. In careful letters, she wrote, "You gave us home when you could have given us only shelter." Samuel read it twice, then looked up to find her watching him. He signed the only response that felt true. Home. Yes. Home. Ishol. She smiled again twice in one day. He marveled and signed good night. As she went to join Emma, Samuel remained by the dying fire, whittling by feel more than sight. The little wooden rabbit was taking shape nicely under his knife, ears alert, ready to run but choosing to stay. Outside. An owl called across the darkness. Inside. Samuel could hear Emma's soft breathing and Sarah's gentle movements as she settled for sleep. The sounds of family, he thought. Then corrected himself. The sounds of his family. The thought should have frightened him. 5 years ago, he'd fled to these woods to escape the pain of loss, the risk of caring. But sitting in the firelight with wood shavings at his feet and the soft sounds of trust surrounding him, he felt only peace. Some walls, he realized, were meant to come down as gently as they'd been built, one word, one sign, one day at a time. He set the finished rabbit on the mantel where Emma would find it in the morning, banked the fire, and headed to his bedroll. Tomorrow. Sarah wanted to learn to use the crosscut saw properly. Emma wanted to find the pond he'd mentioned. Simple plans for an ordinary day, made extraordinary by the fact that he no longer faced them alone. The November frost made the decision for them. Sarah had been sleeping with Emma in the main room while Samuel took the lean-to, but the thin walls offered little protection from the mountain cold. He'd watched them shiver despite the extra quilts, Emma's small body unable to generate enough warmth even pressed against her mother. "I'm building a proper room," Samuel announced at breakfast, speaking while signing the key words. "Before real winter comes." Sarah's hands fluttered in protest. Too much trouble. They were fine. Didn't want to impose. Samuel stopped her with a raised palm and pointed to Emma, whose lips had been blue that morning until the fire warmed her. "Not impose," he signed firmly. "Family." The word hung between them like a promise. Sarah's eyes filled, but she nodded, then surprised him by signing, "I help." They worked together through the week. Samuel had salvaged lumber from an abandoned homestead 2 miles north, good pine planks that only needed cleaning and treatment. Sarah proved surprisingly strong, helping him carry boards while Emma gathered kindling and sorted nails from his supply. The child chattered constantly now, translating her observations for her mother, bridging their two worlds with unconscious ease. "Mama says the wood smells like Christmas," Emma reported, breathing deeply. "What's Christmas smell like here, Papa Samuel?" "Pine and cinnamon," he answered, remembering. "Maybe this year we'll have proper Christmas." Sarah caught the signs and smiled, that increasingly common expression that transformed her face from guarded to radiant. She signed something complex, and Emma translated, "Mama says we can make paper chains and sing carols." "Well, I'll sing and you can listen and Mama will feel the music through the floor." By week's end, the room stood complete, small but solid. With a proper door and glass window, Samuel had traded 2 cords of wood to obtain. Sarah and Emma stood in the doorway, taking in the space that was truly theirs. Sarah ran her fingers along the smooth doorframe, the well-fitted boards, the tiny shelf Samuel had built at Emma's height for her treasures. She turned to Samuel and signed slowly, carefully, "Too much, cannot repay." "Already have," he signed back, then pointed to the changes around the cabin. And it was true. In the month since their arrival, Sarah had transformed his bare shelter into something resembling a home. Flour sack curtains hung at the windows, their edges embroidered with simple flowers. Herbs dried from the rafters, yarrow for wounds, willow bark for fever, echinacea for winter colds. She'd organized his chaos, creating order without disturbing his necessary things. The root cellar, barely used before, now held rows of preserves she'd made from late berries and rose hips, traded honey, and wild apples. She'd learned his routine and enhanced it: coffee ready when he woke, hot water for washing when he returned from cutting, his work clothes mended before he noticed the tears. "Look," Emma called from outside. Mama's garden. They joined her at the small plot Sarah had cleared and prepared for spring. Even in November, she'd planned ahead, marking rows with twine, building a cold frame from old windows, mulching with sawdust from Samuel's work. Medicine plants, Emma explained importantly. Mama knows all of them. Her mama taught her when she was little, like me. Samuel watched Sarah's face as she surveyed her work, saw the pride there, the ownership. This wasn't just shelter anymore, she'd claimed it, marked it with her labor and care. The next morning brought their first trip to town as a family. Samuel had resisted before, but they needed supplies for winter, and Sarah had signed firmly that hiding would only make people more curious. Better to be seen, to become normal, unremarkable. My cousins from back east, Samuel told Mrs. Henderson at the general store. Sarah and little Emma, staying with me for a while. Mrs. Henderson, sharp-eyed but kind, took in Sarah's neat appearance and Emma's healthy glow. About time you had some family around. Samuel Becker. Man shouldn't live alone like a hermit. Sarah nodded politely, not needing to hear the words to understand the tone. She'd prepared for this, teaching Samuel how to sign that she could read lips a little. Though it wasn't entirely true, Emma became her voice, polite and cheerful, charming everyone with her precise speech and helpful nature. At the mercantile, Emma helped sort buttons while Sarah selected fabric and thread. The shopkeeper's wife, Mrs. Palmer, touched Sarah's arm gently and spoke slowly, exaggerating her words. "Beautiful needlework," she said, pointing to Emma's carefully mended dress. Sarah understood enough to smile and nod, signing "thank you" in a way that was unmistakable. Mrs. Palmer pressed an extra packet of needles into her hand, waving away payment. The trip took twice as long as Samuel's usual visits, with several townspeople stopping to introduce themselves. The minister's wife invited them to church, though she looked uncertain about how Sarah would follow the service. The blacksmith's daughter, barely older than Emma, shyly offered to play with her next visit. On the ride home, Samuel felt the shift in how they sat on the wagon bench. Before, Sarah had held herself apart, Emma between them like a small barrier. Now, they sat naturally, Emma on Sarah's lap to leave room for supplies, Sarah's shoulder occasionally brushing his as the wagon rocked. "Town likes you," Samuel said aloud, forgetting to sign. But Sarah understood something in his expression. She pointed to him, to herself, to Emma, then made a circle with her arms. Together. Then she pointed to the road ahead and signed, "Home." That evening, as Sarah taught him new signs by lamplight, he noticed her hands had changed. The desperate flutter of that first night had become confident, measured movements. The trembling fear had transformed into capable strength. She caught him studying her hands and raised an eyebrow in question. "Different," he signed, then struggled to find the right gesture. Finally, he signed, "Strong, sure, home." Sarah looked at her own hands as if seeing them for the first time. Slowly, she signed back, "Because safe, because..." She paused, searching for words he'd understand, then simply pointed to him. Emma, supposedly asleep in their new room, called out, "Mama says because of you. Papa Samuel, you made us brave again." Sarah flushed and signed rapidly to Emma to go to sleep. But the truth had been spoken. Samuel felt it settle into his chest like a warm stone, filling a hollow he'd forgotten existed. "You both brave already," he said, signing as he spoke. "Just needed place to show it." Sarah held his gaze for a long moment, then signed something he didn't recognize. Seeing his confusion, she taught him the new sign, her hands shaping his carefully, "Trust." It was, he realized, the foundation of everything they'd built, not the salvaged lumber or chinked logs, but this careful, daily choice to believe in each other's goodness. Outside, winter wind tested their walls and found them solid. Inside, trust did the same with their hearts and found them ready. The September storm announced itself 3 days early with unseasonable heat and air so still the birds fell silent. Samuel knew the signs the way clouds piled like mountains on the horizon, the barometer dropping steadily, the livestock restless in neighboring farms. He'd weathered plenty of storms alone, but this felt different, bigger. Bad weather coming, he signed to Sarah at breakfast, then pointed to the heavy sky. She nodded, already aware. She'd been watching the signs too, had seen him checking the roof repeatedly, noting the loose shingles he'd meant to replace before winter. By afternoon, the wind had picked up, sending dust devils spinning across the yard. Samuel climbed onto the roof with his repair kit, but the gust nearly knocked him flat. Half the shingles that needed replacing were already lifting, threatening to tear away completely. Sarah emerged from the cabin, her hair whipping loose from its pins. She pointed urgently at a section near the chimney where shingles were flapping like wounded birds. The wind stole any attempt at speaking, but her gestures were clear danger. Now, hurry. They worked without need for words or signs. Sarah passed up shingles while Samuel nailed desperately, racing the storm. Emma appeared with the spare hammer, and Sarah climbed up beside him, holding shingles in place while he secured them. The wind tried to tear her away, but she anchored herself against the chimney, dress plastered to her legs, determination set in every line of her body. Thunder cracked overhead like splitting wood. The first fat raindrops hit as they scrambled down, Samuel catching Sarah when she missed the last rung, Emma already running to herd the chickens into their coop. They worked in perfect synchronization, Samuel securing the shutters, Sarah bringing in anything that could become a projectile, Emma latching everything that could latch. The barn door had torn partially loose, hanging at an angle that would catch the wind like a sail. Samuel and Sarah fought it together, muscles straining to lift it back into place while Emma held the lantern, her small face brave despite the fear in her eyes. Sarah's strength surprised him again when the door suddenly swung with the wind. She threw her full weight against it, giving him the moment needed to reset the hinges. Inside the cabin, they could finally breathe. Rain hammered the roof like determined fists, but the new shingles held. Wind screamed through the trees, punctuated by the crack of falling branches. Emma pressed against her mother, singing softly to herself the same lullaby Samuel had heard her humming when scared. "You sing too, Papa Samuel," Emma said. "Mama likes to feel the sounds." So he did, his rough voice joining Emma's sweet one in an old hymn his mother had sung during storms. Sarah placed her hand on the table, feeling the vibrations through the wood. By lamplight, her face showed something between wonder and peace. The storm raged through the night. They took turns keeping watch, stoking the fire, checking for leaks. When a particularly vicious gust shook the walls, Samuel saw real fear flash across Sarah's face, not for herself, but for Emma, for this fragile safety they'd built. He signed firmly, "Strong house, we built strong." Around midnight, the wind shifted, driving rain horizontal against the windows. The lean-to addition groaned but held. Sarah had lined the walls with her salvaged fabric, and it proved wise the cloth caught the minor leaks, protecting the room itself. "Mama's smart," Emma announced sleepily from her cocoon of quilts. "She thinks of everything." "Your mama's the smartest person I know," Samuel agreed, signing as he spoke. Sarah ducked her head, but he caught her pleased smile. By dawn, the storm had blown itself out, leaving eerie quiet in its wake. They ventured out together to survey the damage. 3 large trees down, one dangerously close to the chicken coop, part of the garden fence destroyed. The old outhouse had shifted 2 feet off its foundation, but the cabin stood solid, the barn intact, the animals safe. "We did it," Emma shouted, dancing in the mud puddles. "We beat the storm." Sarah and Samuel stood side by side, exhausted but victorious. She signed something, then pointed to the cabin, to the barn, to all they'd protected. Then she made the sign for together, followed by a new one she had to teach him stronger. The cleanup took days, but neighbors appeared as they always did after storms. The Hendersons brought their eldest boy to help with the fallen trees. The minister came with his congregation's work crew. Even the skeptical blacksmith arrived with tools and expertise. "You three handled this well," Henderson observed, watching Sarah and Emma stack salvageable wood while Samuel and the other men sawed the fallen trees. "Like you've been a family for years." "Feels like it," Samuel replied without thinking, then realized the truth of it. That evening, after the helpers had gone home with thanks and promises of reciprocal aid, the three of them sat on the porch watching sunset paint the storm-washed sky. Emma had fallen asleep in Samuel's lap, worn out from the excitement. Sarah sat close enough that their shoulders touched, a casual intimacy that would have been unthinkable a month ago. She signed slowly, making sure he understood. "Today, you could have lost everything. The house, the barn, but you worried for us first." Samuel considered his response carefully, then signed, "House is wood. Barn is wood. You and Emma." He struggled for the right sign, then simply placed his hand over his heart. Sarah's eyes glistened. She reached over and took his free hand the first time she'd initiated such contact. Her fingers spelled out letters in his palm, slowly, deliberately, Family. "Yes," he said aloud, though she couldn't hear. "Yes." Emma stirred, mumbling in her sleep. "Papa protects us. Mama makes us strong. Emma makes us happy." Sarah and Samuel looked at each other over the child's head, and in that moment, something shifted permanently. The storm had tested more than their walls, it had tested their trust, their unity, their commitment to this unexpected family. They'd passed every test. Later, as Sarah helped Emma to bed, the child asked sleepily, "Are we staying forever now?" Sarah looked at Samuel, who was banking the fire for the night. He met her gaze and nodded once, firmly. Sarah smoothed Emma's hair and signed something the child was too tired to translate. But Samuel didn't need translation. The answer was written in every board they'd nailed together, every shingle they'd fought to save, every moment they'd stood against the storm as one. When Sarah returned to the main room, she went to his shelf and pulled down his journal. In careful script beneath his last entry, she wrote, "September 15th, 1884. The storm came. We were ready. We were together. We were home. Sarah." She handed him the journal, and he read her words by firelight. When he looked up, she signed simply, "Our story now. Not just yours." Samuel nodded and added his own line, "She's right. Thank God she's right. Samuel." They sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the drip of water from the eaves, the settling of the house after its trial. No more storms tonight, just peace, earned and shared. Outside, the world had been washed clean. Inside, something stronger than any storm had been built from trust, courage. And the choice to stand together when standing alone would have been easier but infinitely lonelier. The lamp burned low as they finally retired Sarah to her room with Emma, Samuel to his. But the doors stayed open, the spaces between them filled with something more than air. They'd weathered their first real test. Everything that came after would be measured against this night when they'd fought the storm and won. Not as individuals seeking shelter, but as a family protecting their home. October arrived with frost on the windows and the stranger at their door. Samuel saw him first through the kitchen window, the same Morrison from before, but this time he'd brought help. Two men waited by the horses, trying to look casual but clearly positioned to prevent escape. "Samuel," Morrison called out, too familiar, too confident. "Need to speak with you about those cousins of yours." Sarah had seen them too. She stood frozen at the wash basin. Emma pressed against her skirts. Samuel signed quickly, "Stay inside. I handle." Then he stepped onto the porch, closing the door firmly behind him. Morrison held up a sheaf of papers, official-looking with seals and signatures. "Commitment papers," he announced. "Signed by a judge in Portland. Sarah Morrison is mentally deficient, unable to care for herself or her child. I'm her legal guardian, appointed by the court." Samuel took the papers, reading carefully. The language was complex, full of legal terms, but the meaning was clear. According to these documents, Sarah was incompetent, possibly dangerous, requiring institutional care. Morrison was named as guardian with full authority over her person and property. "These are dated 2 weeks ago," Samuel observed. "After you came here. Had to get the legal matters sorted." Morrison smiled coldly. "Now, I'll be taking them both. The child needs her father's protection, and Sarah needs proper medical care. The child's father," Samuel kept his voice level, "my brother, passed last year, sadly, which makes me Emma's guardian as well." Another document appeared. "All legal and proper." Samuel studied Morrison's soft hands, his calculating eyes. "Your brother must have been quite different from you." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Just observing." Samuel handed back the papers. "You'll need the sheriff to enforce these." Morrison's smile widened. "Already spoke with him. He's waiting in town. Didn't want to make a scene. Thought you might be reasonable. But if needed—" He gestured to his companions. Through the window, Samuel saw Sarah signing frantically to Emma, then moving toward the back door. He shifted slightly, blocking Morrison's view. "I'll need to prepare them for travel," Samuel said. "Come back in an hour with the sheriff." "They go nowhere without me," Morrison stated flatly. "Then come in and wait." Samuel opened the door wide. "Coffee's hot." Morrison hesitated, then entered with one companion, leaving the other with the horses. Sarah and Emma had vanished into their room. Samuel poured coffee with steady hands while Morrison's man positioned himself by the door. "She's truly unable to speak?" Morrison asked conversationally. "Must make things difficult." "She communicates fine," Samuel replied. "But she can't tell her side of things, can she? Can't explain why she abandoned her husband's family, stole away in the night with their only grandchild?" Samuel heard movement outside, soft footsteps on the back porch. Through the side window, he glimpsed Mrs. Henderson approaching with her husband. Then the minister appeared from the other direction. Within minutes, half a dozen neighbors had materialized, word spreading through some invisible network Samuel had never been part of before. Mrs. Henderson entered without knocking. "Samuel Becker, I need that receipt for the eggs." Sarah promised. "Oh." She stopped, taking in Morrison and his companion. "Company. Business," Morrison said curtly. "Private business." "Nothing's private in a small town," the blacksmith announced, filling the doorway, "especially when it concerns our neighbors." More people crowded in. The shopkeeper's wife went straight to Sarah's room, emerging with both mother and child. Sarah's face was pale but determined. She'd changed into her best dress, hair pinned neatly, presenting herself as anything but mentally deficient. "This is the woman?" Mrs. Palmer asked, examining Sarah with sharp eyes. "The one you claim is incompetent." "The court has ruled," Morrison began. "Portland Court," the minister interrupted. "No jurisdiction here. This is county matter. The sheriff is my son-in-law," Henderson stated, "and he's coming now. Figured we'd all hear this together." The sheriff arrived, young and uncomfortable with the crowd. He examined Morrison's papers while the room watched in tense silence. Sarah stood perfectly still, Emma's hand in hers, dignity radiating from every line of her posture. "Mr. Morrison," the sheriff finally said, "these papers claim Mrs. Morrison is your brother's widow." "That's correct." "Then why does this death certificate show James Morrison died 2 years ago, not one?" Morrison's face flushed. "A clerical error. And this commitment paper," the sheriff continued, "signed by Judge Hartley. He retired 6 months ago. Hasn't signed anything official since March." The room stirred. Sarah's eyes widened with hope. "Furthermore," Mrs. Henderson spoke up, "Sarah's been here near about 2 years now. Everyone knows that. She came here long before these papers were dated." "That's right," the shopkeeper agreed. "Remember when she helped with the church social that first spring, made those beautiful quilts for the auction?" One by one, the neighbors spoke up, creating a history that had never existed but suddenly felt true. Sarah had helped with harvest. Emma had sung at the Christmas pageant. They'd been here so long, everyone knew them. Morrison's face darkened. "You're all lying. Conspiracy to harbor." "Careful," the minister said quietly. "Bearing false witness is a serious charge, as is forging legal documents." The sheriff held up the papers. "Mr. Morrison, I'll need you to come with me. These documents require investigation. Possible forgery. False representation to an officer of the law." "This isn't over," Morrison snarled, looking directly at Sarah. "A woman like her, defective, shouldn't be raising a child. I have resources." Samuel stepped between them. "You have 5 minutes to leave this property." "Or what?" Morrison sneered. "You'll make me—" "No," Samuel said quietly. "They will." Morrison looked around at the assembled neighbors, farmers, and tradesmen, their wives and daughters, all standing silent and immovable. The blacksmith cracked his knuckles. Henderson's boys flanked the door. Even gentle Mrs. Palmer looked fierce. "The child needs her real family." Morrison tried one last time. Emma's voice rang out clear and strong. "This is my real family. All of them. Papa Samuel and Mama and everyone here. You're nobody." Sarah pulled Emma back, but the words had been said. Morrison's companion tugged his arm, recognizing defeat. They left under the watch of the entire community, the sheriff following to ensure their departure from the county. As the sound of horses faded, Sarah's composure finally cracked. She sank into a chair, hands shaking as she signed "thank you" over and over to the assembled crowd. Mrs. Henderson squeezed her shoulder. "No thanks needed. We protect our own—" "Always have," the blacksmith added. "Always will." One by one, the neighbors departed, each stopping to pat Sarah's hand or ruffle Emma's hair. The minister's wife left a pot of stew. The shopkeeper quietly mentioned that credit was available if needed. Henderson promised to spread word that the strangers were unwelcome in the county. When only the three of them remained, Sarah went to Samuel and signed slowly, tears streaming down her face. "They lied for us. Everyone lied." "Not lie," Samuel signed back. "Truth. You are here 2 years, in all ways that matter. You are family, to me, to them. Truth of heart more true than paper." Emma climbed into his lap, wrapping her small arms around his neck. "Were you scared, Papa Samuel?" "Yes," he admitted, pulling Sarah close with his other arm. "Very scared." "But you stood up anyway," Emma said proudly. "That's what brave means." Sarah leaned into his shoulder, her hand finding his. She fingerspelled into his palm, HOMESAFEFAMILY. He spelled back ALWAYS. That night, after Emma slept, Sarah showed Samuel something she'd hidden, a letter from Morrison, received weeks ago at the general store. It promised money if she returned, threatened legal action if she didn't. She'd burned it, but kept the envelope as proof of his pursuit. "No more hiding," Samuel said, looking at the Portland postmark. "Tomorrow. We see the lawyer in town, make things legal our way." Sarah nodded, then signed, "Together, together," he confirmed, then added the sign she'd taught him that first week, "Always safe." The first snow fell early that year, blanketing the cabin in pristine white by the first week of December. Samuel had noticed Sarah growing quieter as winter deepened. Her smiles fewer, her hands sometimes trembling when she thought no one was watching. The confrontation with Morrison had left deeper wounds than visible ones. That evening, after Emma had drawn pictures by the firehouses with smoke curling from chimneys, 3 stick figures always holding hands, Sarah finally let the truth spill out through her flying fingers and Emma's small voice translating. "Mama says she needs to tell you about before," Emma said, her child's voice carrying adult weight. "About my first papa." Samuel set down his whittling knife, giving them his full attention. Sarah's signs came slowly at first, then faster as the story poured out. Emma translated in fragments, sometimes adding her own memories. Mama was 17 when they married. Her parents arranged it because his family had money and land. They didn't know he was mean. He hid it good at first. Sarah's hands showed the progression, gentle touches becoming grips, grips becoming bruises. She pointed to her ears, then signed how her deafness had enraged him, made him feel cheated. He'd wanted a proper wife who could entertain guests, manage servants, be his ornament. When I came, Emma continued translating. He was happy at first, but then angry that Mama couldn't hear me cry. Said she was unfit, started talking about institutions. Sarah's signs grew more agitated. Through Emma's voice, the story emerged: years of isolation, forbidden from learning sign language, kept from other deaf people who might teach her to communicate. The husband controlling everything: money, food, even paper and pencils that might let her write messages. The night we left, Emma said, then paused. Mama, do I tell about the papers? Sarah nodded firmly. Her hands moved deliberately now, each sign precise. Samuel learned that Morrison, the husband's brother, had drawn up commitment papers years ago, waiting for the right judge, the right moment. The plan was to institutionalize Sarah and raise Emma to be ashamed of her mother's deficiency. Mama heard them talking, not heard, but saw them through the door crack. Morrison said terrible places do terrible things to make people normal. Said Emma needed a proper mother, not a defective one. Sarah stopped signing, her hands falling to her lap. Emma scooted closer to her mother, then looked at Samuel with eyes too knowing for her years. That's when Mama got brave. She took the money hidden in the flour jar and we walked all night to the train station. Then another train. Then walking again until we found you. Samuel absorbed this in silence, understanding now the miracle of their trust. After such betrayal, Sarah had still chosen to believe in his goodness. Emma had called him Papa despite learning that fathers could be cruel. Your turn, Emma announced unexpectedly. Mama wants to know about your before. Samuel had never spoken of it, not in 5 years of solitude, but looking at their expectant faces, Sarah's gentle despite her own pain. Emma's curious but patient, he found the words coming. Had a wife, Mary. Had a son, Thomas. His voice roughened. Scarlet fever took them both, 6 years ago this spring. He told them about the small farm in Nebraska, about Mary's laugh and Thomas's first steps, about the epidemic that swept through, taking half the town's children and too many mothers, about holding them both as they burned with fever, helpless to save them. Came here to hide, he admitted, signing as he spoke. Thought if I never loved again, couldn't hurt that way again. Sarah moved then, crossing to sit beside him. She signed slowly, we all hiding. You from pain, me from cruelty, Emma from father who didn't deserve her. But we found each other, Emma added, climbing into Samuel's lap. That means something. Right, Mama says God works mysterious ways. Samuel looked at Sarah over Emma's head. Not mysterious this time. Clear as day. Sarah's hands moved in a new pattern, one he didn't recognize. She repeated it slowly, then finger-spelled Love. The word hung in the air like snow crystals, delicate and perfect. Samuel repeated the sign, then pointed from himself to Sarah, to Emma, and back. Love? Yes. Emma clapped with delight. Mama's crying happy tears. She never cries happy tears. Indeed, tears tracked down Sarah's cheeks, but her smile was radiant. She signed something complex that Emma translated. Mama says we're not broken people hiding anymore. We're whole people choosing to stay. Samuel pulled them both close, feeling the truth of it. The cabin that had been his hiding place had become their choosing place. Every day they stayed was a decision, not a default. Tomorrow, he said, we go to town. See the lawyer Henderson recommended. Make things legal and proper. Sarah pulled back, signing a question. Emma translated, Mama wants to know legal how. Samuel had been thinking about this for weeks, but saying it aloud felt momentous. Adoption papers for Emma. Legal guardian papers for you, Sarah, saying you're competent and independent, and, he paused, gathering courage. Marriage papers, if you're willing. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth. Emma bounced with excitement. Mama, say yes, say yes. But Sarah was signing rapidly, and Emma's translation came in a rush. Mama says you don't have to marry her to keep us safe. Says we won't trap you with obligation. Says marriage should be for love, not protection. Samuel caught Sarah's hands, stilling their anxious movement. He signed slowly, making sure she understood. Not obligation. Choice. Not protection. Love. Real love. Marry me. Sarah searched his face for a long moment, then signed the word he'd learned just minutes ago. Love. Then yes. Emma shrieked with joy, throwing her arms around both their necks. A real family, papers and everything? Through the window, snow continued falling, erasing old tracks, covering the paths that had brought them here. Samuel thought about the ironies, three people who'd fled from different griefs, finding each other in the middle of nowhere. Sarah, who couldn't hear, had listened to his loneliness. He, who'd chosen silence, had learned a new language. Emma, born between two worlds, had bridged them effortlessly. No more secrets, Emma asked seriously. No more scared. No more secrets. Samuel confirmed. Still scared sometimes, that's human, but scared together, brave together. Sarah signed something that needed no translation, her hand over her heart. Then touching Samuel's chest, then pulling Emma close. The gesture encompassed everything: gratitude, trust, love, and the promise of all the tomorrows they'd face as a family. That night, after Emma had fallen asleep between them by the fire, too excited for her own bed, Sarah and Samuel sat in comfortable silence. She pulled out his journal and wrote, December 5th, 1884. The truth was told, all of it. We are still here. We are more here than ever. Tomorrow we make it legal. Tonight it is already true. Sarah. Samuel added his own line. Found what I wasn't looking for. Healed what I thought couldn't heal. Home isn't a place to hide anymore. It's a place to live. Samuel. Sarah read his words, then signed, together. Together. He agreed, then added the sign she'd taught him, always. Outside. The snow had stopped, leaving the world crystalline and new. Inside, three people who'd started as strangers sat wrapped in quilts and certainty, no longer running from the past, but walking toward a future they'd chosen with eyes wide open and hearts finally unguarded. The lamp burned low, casting golden light on their faces. Emma mumbled in her sleep about wedding dresses and Christmas cakes. Sarah's hand found Samuel's in the dimness, and he felt her finger spell slowly, carefully, H-O-M-E. He spelled back, F-O-R-E-V-E-R. And in the morning, they would make it official. But tonight, in the warmth of truth finally spoken and love finally acknowledged, it was already more real than any paper could make it. They were home. They were family. They were choosing to stay, not from fear or necessity, but from the kind of love that transforms Tuesday into forever, and a cabin in the woods into the center of the world. The lawyer in town, Mr. Fitzgerald, proved to be a thorough man with kind eyes and a grandfather's patience. He'd already heard about the Morrison incident from Henderson and had prepared documents before they arrived. Sarah sat very straight in his office, Emma on her lap, while Samuel translated the legal terms into signs they'd practiced. First matter, Fitzgerald said, is establishing Mrs. Sarah's legal competence. I've prepared affidavits from 12 townspeople attesting to her intelligence, capability, and fitness as a mother. He spread the papers out statements from Mrs. Henderson about Sarah's skill in managing household accounts, from the minister's wife about her participation in church activities, from the shopkeeper about her keen eye for quality and fair trades. Even the skeptical blacksmith had written about her quick understanding of mechanical problems when his wife had been ill and Sarah had helped at the forge. The court will also require a medical opinion. Fitzgerald continued. Doc Brennan has already agreed to examine you and provide testimony that deafness is not mental deficiency. Sarah nodded, signing her understanding. Emma translated her question. Mama wants to know if Morrison can challenge it. He could try, Fitzgerald admitted. But forging legal documents is a serious crime. He won't risk drawing attention to himself now. The adoption papers for Emma came next. Complex documents establishing Samuel as her legal father. Emma bounced with excitement as Fitzgerald explained that she could keep her first name but take Samuel's last name if she wished. Emma Becker, she tried out loud. I like it. And then came the marriage license. Fitzgerald looked between them carefully. You understand this isn't necessary for protection now, with the competency established and adoption papers. You're both secure. Sarah signed rapidly, and Emma translated with a giggle. Mama says she knows, says that's why it's perfect. Choosing because of want, not need. Samuel signed his agreement, then added aloud, Been alone by choice for 5 years. Now choosing not to be alone. That's worth something. Worth everything. Fitzgerald smiled, preparing the documents. They signed where he indicated, Emma carefully writing her name as witness where allowed. The December sun streamed through the office windows, blessing the paperwork that made legal what the heart had already decided. 3 days later, they stood in the small church, the pews filled with the neighbors who'd become family. Sarah wore a blue dress Mrs. Henderson had helped her make. Emma had flowers braided in her hair, and Samuel had trimmed his beard and worn his father's watch chain. The minister spoke slowly so Sarah could follow his lips somewhat, but it was Emma who translated the important parts, her small voice carrying through the church. When it came time for vows, Sarah signed hers while Samuel spoke his aloud, then reversed. He signed while she wrote her promise on a slate for all to see, with my whole heart, always. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the minister declared, and the congregation erupted in celebration. At the reception in the church hall, Emma danced with everyone who would partner her, translating conversations between Sarah and the townspeople, her face glowing with belonging. The shopkeeper's wife had made a cake, the Henderson boys played fiddle, and even the stern blacksmith was seen wiping his eyes during the toasts. Spring arrived early that year, and with it, changes. Sarah's garden expanded to include medicinal herbs she sold to Doc Brennan. Samuel built a larger chicken coop. Planning for the chickens, Mrs. Palmer had promised from her prize-winning flock. Emma started attending the town school 3 days a week, walking the 5 miles with the Henderson children. The morning routine adapted. Sarah would pack Emma's lunch while Samuel checked her slate work, all three using a mixture of speech and sign that had become their private language. Emma was teaching sign language to her schoolmates, creating a small revolution of silent communication during lessons that made the teacher alternately frustrated and fascinated. It was on a mild April evening that the knock came soft, hesitant, familiar in its desperation. Samuel opened the door to find a young couple, the woman heavily pregnant, the man supporting her with tender concern. They were Chinese, their clothes travel-worn, their eyes holding the same mixture of fear and hope Samuel had seen in Sarah's that first night. Please, the man said in accented English. My wife, the baby comes soon. The town. They would not. He stopped, shame and anger fighting in his expression. Sarah appeared beside Samuel, taking in the situation instantly. She signed rapidly to Samuel, then took the woman's arm, guiding her inside with gentle insistence. Emma ran for clean linens without being asked. The midwife, Samuel began. The man shook his head. She refused, said she doesn't deliver Chinese babies. Sarah's face darkened with understanding. She'd felt the sting of being thought deficient, less than human. She signed firmly to Samuel. I help. Saw many births on farm as girl. Through the night, Sarah tended the woman with sure hands and calm presence. Samuel boiled water and fetched supplies while Emma translated Sarah's signs to the couple. her child's voice matter-of-fact about miracles. When the baby finally arrived healthy, loud, perfect, Sarah placed him in his mother's arms with tears streaming down her face. The couple stayed 3 days, recovering, and in that time, stories were exchanged. The man, Li Wei, was a railroad worker who'd saved enough to bring his wife from California. They'd been trying to reach Portland where a cousin lived, but the baby had other plans. The woman, Mei Ling, was an artist who drew beautiful pictures that needed no translation, communicating with Sarah through images when signs failed. On the morning they prepared to leave, Li Wei pressed a small carved jade pendant into Sarah's hand. "For kindness," he said simply. Sarah signed something complex, and Emma translated, "Mama says kindness given always comes back. Says you blessed our home with trust." After they left, Samuel found Sarah crying in the garden, happy tears that needed no explanation. They'd come full circle from desperate strangers seeking shelter to providers of sanctuary. Word spread, as word does in small communities and beyond. The cabin that had been Samuel's hiding place became known as a safe haven. Over the months that followed, others came a freed slave family heading north, a widow with 3 children escaping an abusive brother-in-law, a young man fleeing conscription into a war he didn't believe in. Some stayed a night, some a week, all left with food, directions, and sometimes a little money from the jar Sarah kept hidden in the flour bin, the same way she'd once hidden her escape funds. Emma thrived in this atmosphere of constant helping, her natural empathy deepening with each story she translated, each language she bridged. She started keeping a journal like Samuel's, writing down the stories people shared, the signs Sarah invented for new concepts, the words in different languages she collected like treasures. One evening in late spring, as they sat on the porch watching Emma teach sign language to the newest temporary guests, an Italian family with twin boys, Sarah signed to Samuel. "We built more than home, built lighthouse." Samuel understood. They were a beacon now, their happiness visible, their welcome known. The very thing Morrison had tried to use against them, Sarah's supposed deficiency, had become their strength. Who better to recognize the desperate, the voiceless, the dismissed, than someone who'd been labeled all 3, never empty house now? Samuel signed back, remembering his early words about living alone. Sarah smiled, that radiant expression that still caught him by surprise. She signed, "Full hearts make full houses." Emma called out from the yard where she was playing with the Italian boys. "Mama, Papa, look, I taught them family in signs." 3 sets of small hands made the gesture Sarah had taught them, all fingers interlocked, pulled close to the heart. The Italian father tried to copy it, laughing at his clumsy attempts while his wife wiped tears, understanding the sentiment without words. As darkness fell and lamps were lit, Samuel pulled out his journal to record the day. His entry was simple. May 15th, 1885. The house is full of strangers who aren't strangers. The table extends, the walls expand, the heart grows. Sarah was right, we're not hiding anymore. We're a lighthouse, and Emma is already planning to teach at the school for the deaf they're building in Portland. Our girl will change the world with her hands and her voice. This is what happens when you stop running and start choosing. You become the safe place you once searched for. Sarah read over his shoulder, then added in her careful script, "Home is not a place, it's a promise. We keep it every day." Below, Emma had drawn a picture, a cabin with its door wide open, light spilling out, and figures of all sizes walking toward it. At the bottom, in her best penmanship, she'd written, "The Becker family, Samuel, Sarah, Emma, and everyone who needs us." Samuel closed the journal and pulled his family close. Through the window, they could see their latest guests settling for the night, safe and welcomed. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own strangers becoming family. But tonight, in their cabin that had become a crossroads of hope, they were complete, not because they needed no one else, but because they'd learned that needing others and being needed in return was the truest form of wealth. The lighthouse stood strong against all storms, its light constant, its door always open, its family always growing. And in the years to come, many would remember the silent woman who heard everything that mattered, the quiet man who spoke loudest through actions, and the child who bridged worlds with joy. They would remember and pass on the story of sanctuary offered and multiplied, of love that grew by giving itself away. The end had become a beginning, the hiding place had become a homestead, and 3 broken people had become whole not by healing alone, but by helping others heal. The circle was complete. The light would never go out. I've told you this story because I needed you to know that families aren't always born from blood, and homes aren't always built from wood. Sometimes they're constructed from desperate knocks on doors, from hands learning new languages, from choosing to stand between danger and those who cannot stand alone. Samuel thought he was saving Sarah and Emma that night he opened his door. Truth was, they saved each other. Every act of trust, Sarah teaching him signs. Samuel facing down Morrison, Emma calling him Papa. These weren't just kindnesses, they were bridges built between isolated islands of pain, creating something larger than any of them could have imagined alone. You see, gratitude isn't just saying thank you, it's Sarah making preserves from forest berries, contributing to the home that sheltered her. It's Samuel building that extra room, not from obligation but from recognition that sanctuary given becomes sanctuary received. It's Emma translating between worlds, making everyone family with her innocent insistence that love needs no common language. That cabin became a lighthouse because 3 broken people discovered that the only way to truly heal is to help others heal. They learned that real family begins the moment you choose to stay, to fight for each other, to transform Tuesday into forever.